the worst case for the region and for the world would be a strike against nuclear facilities. And I understand that the greatest benefit for Israel is to counter what it sees as an existential threat of a nuclear Iran. But let me tell you that Iranian nuclear sites are amongst the most well guarded in terms of air defense. Oil terminals and the oil facilities are an easier target. We can't totally ignore that Iran could reciprocate by hitting oil facilities, gas facilities elsewhere. Iran is a country of 100 million. Let's not forget, states of that sort have a resilience. Israel has regained much of its allure as a military state or Sparta, but it has lost something as a beacon of a democracy in that region. For two countries to do that without a land border is going to be a challenge, but yes, you can expect a possible escalation before there is de-escalation.
How damaging would it be for India? Which are the areas you see that we would face some issues that we should be concerned about?
So India's engagement with the region is primarily economical. It's not a major political player in that region, but we have enormous economic stakes. Much of our oil comes from there. If there is an impact on the facilities, it will have impact on us.
Nothing but the truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. Every week, we will look at key issues of concern and bring you perspectives and clarity as to why these matter to you without holding back on the truth. In this episode, we will focus on the ongoing Israel-Iran conflict that seemed to have reached a dangerous tipping point. We will look at the big questions. Will the Israel-Iran conflict widen into a regional war that could engulf the whole of the Middle East? The second one is, how would such a regional conflict impact the world? And the third, of course, is closer to India. How will it impact India directly? And what role can India play? We will answer these three big questions with an in-depth conversation with Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, a former permanent representative of India to the UN and an expert on Middle East. He is currently Dean of the Kautilya School of Public Policy. But before that, just a quick recap. First, if you recall, Hamas, the Palestinian nationalist organization based in Gaza, launched a deadly terror attack against Israel on October 7th, 2023, last year that is. The attack claimed over 1,400 lives, including Israeli civilians and soldiers. A total of 251 Israeli and foreigners were taken hostage, and as of last month, 101 of them remain in captivity, that's the latest report, and over 72 others have been killed. The Hamas attack marked a new level of violence in the 76-year-long struggle of Palestinians to establish an independent Palestinian state after Israel was formed in 1948. In response to the Hamas attack, Israel initiated a really massive military campaign, including airstrikes and ground attacks, aimed at dismantling the Hamas leadership and cadre in Gaza, and the civilian death toll as of today has surpassed 41,000 people, including a whole lot of civilians, and Gaza's infrastructure is in ruins. We see pictures of them daily, with entire neighborhoods wiped out, critical infrastructure like hospitals and schools severely damaged, and millions displaced. Meanwhile, the involvement of Hezbollah, the Shia militant organization based in South Lebanon and backed by Iran, has further complicated the conflict. Hezbollah regularly fired missiles into Israel to avenge for the Gaza attacks, and Israel in turn conducted airstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions in return. More recently, Israel upped the ante by decapitating much of the militant leadership of Hamas and Hezbollah. It first killed Ismail Haniyeh, a top Hamas political leader, with a precision strike when he was visiting Iran on July 31st, 2024. That's this year. And then on September 17th, just a month ago, Israel carried out a series of pager blasts sophisticated explosive devices targeting Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon that killed more than 32 of them. This was the first big example of what they call cyber kinetic warfare that has dangerous portents for the rest of the world, because no more are our pagers, our mobiles safe. They could be rigged to explode as Israel had done with the Hezbollah. More recently, on September 27th, Israel Defense Forces successfully killed Hassan Nasrallah, the key leader of Hezbollah, with a precision missile strike into Lebanon. These strikes marked a major turning point in the conflict, with the focus falling now on Iran, Israel's prime adversary that has backed both the Hamas and the Hezbollah. On October 1st, Iran carried out a volley of ballistic missiles and possibly drones into Israel territory, while Israel's famed Iron Dome blocked most of the missiles, intercepted them. Iran claims that some of them struck vital air bases and destroyed even fighter aircraft that were stationed there. After the attack, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting him, Iran had made a big mistake. That was what he said, and went on to vow that he would retaliate and even bring about a regime change in Iran. Though Iran and Israel had launched missile attacks against each other in April, both sides had pulled back then from a further direct conflict, but experts say now that the recent attacks are vastly different and Israel is likely to hit back hard. This has sparked off fears and concerns of a wider regional war that could impact not just the Middle East, but the world, including India. To analyze what could happen next, this is the time to welcome Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, as I had mentioned earlier, a distinguished Indian diplomat and a former permanent representative to the UN, and of course an old friend. Akbar, welcome to Nothing But the Truth.
Thank you very much, Raj, for providing me an opportunity to engage with you, and through you, to your large audience. It's wonderful to catch up with you.
Thank you, Akbar. And let's get to the, cut to the chase and come to the big question that everyone wants to know. Will the current Israel-Iran conflict explode into an all-out regional war?
So, Raj, we must start by saying that it's only the newest phase of a conflict which has been brewing for years, for decades. It was subterranean in nature. If you recollect, more than a decade ago, Iranian nuclear facilities were infected by a virus called Stuxnet. I used to work with the IAEA then. Nobody could find out what was the origin of that. It was subterranean in nature. Then we had a spate of assassinations, some of which you have listed. And then we've seen a country funding and arming the non-state actors. So this is the newest phase where that long-standing drama has led to emergence of a clear fault line between two countries in the Middle East. So all of us grew up with the belief that the single fault line in the Middle East or West Asia was Arabs versus Israelis on the issue of Palestine. That was true 70 years ago, but the world has changed. So today you see a second fault line, which is as difficult and as sharp as the cleavage between Arabs and Israelis. And this is the fault line between Israel and Iran. It's a fault line which in many ways is going to define the future. Now, if your question is, how is the future going to pan out? I would say that the past gives us some trend lines. Not that there is certainty in this, but it provides some trend lines. So can it become a full-blown conflict? Differences between Iran and Israel. So it would be unusual to have a full-blown conflict between two countries which don't share a land border at all.
Right.
Number two is that these countries are, if I may say so, mid-powers or at best middle-level powers. They're not global powers or they're not great powers with reach beyond a certain extent. So each is limited.
Right.
So if they are limited in nature, if their reach is not unlimited, what we can certainly expect is perhaps an escalation, because as you said, this is not the replay of April. It is a one level above of an escalatory step. But whether that will reach to a conflagration of such sort that it will devour everybody, it would be unusual for this sort of a thing to happen between countries who have engaged differently with each other, have been at each other's throats for many years, but unknown to the rest. But they do not have the capacity to sustain long wars. And you can see what has been our experience in just the last 2 years.
Correct.
Ukraine and Russia are still fighting after a year and a half.
Right.
Gaza is almost 1 year old, the conflict there, and a non-state actor has been decapacitated, but it still remains a factor. So
Right.
for two countries to do that without a land border is going to be a challenge. But yes, you can expect a possible escalation before there is de-escalation.
That's a very interesting point you have. It is not an alarmist view of what is going to happen in the regional, conflict that could happen. But let's just look, Akbar, at assess the situation. We saw what happened on October 7th, 2023. We are a year from that now. What would you say has been the outcome, the impact that is there? If you take us through Hamas, take us through Hezbollah, take us look at Israel's strategy so far.
Right. So if we look at October 7th last year, what happened in terms of an egregious attack on Israel was perhaps unprecedented in the history of Israel. What did it mean? It meant that the famed Israeli security doctrine was seen as something on the verge of collapse, because nobody ever thought that this sort of a situation will be faced by a country which has always said military defense first, security first, to all other, compared to all other tools. Its primary tool was security. Yet we found that that security was breached. So it was clearly a game changer for Israel, but also for the rest of the Middle East, because never had this sort of a shift happen where a non-state actor could do this sort of a damage to one of established regional powers in that region. Having said that, look at today. A year later, Israel has recouped a lot of what it lost then in terms of its military prestige. It has since then conducted a war despite all other pleas for ceasefire. The war rages, and Hamas has been largely overtaken or decapitated. What happens on the northern front? Hezbollah, which was seen to be a larger threat than what Hamas was, is clearly on the back foot, because it has its leader killed. Its leadership is in difficult circumstances, hiding from where they were. They were not the same force that they were before. Also, the use of cyber, use of these detonating pages, all are exceptional events which have all indicated that Israel's military strategy is back in action.
That's a good point.
So Israel today is in perhaps a stronger military position than it was then, but it has lost something. And that something is a tool that Israel has not paid attention to in the past, but that still has a role in global affairs, which is its diplomatic outreach. You have seen in that period some European Union states like Ireland, Norway, Spain, now recognizing Palestine, which they hadn't done before. the outrage in the streets of Europe and even on American campuses means Israel's allure as a democratic state has been come under some cloud. But Prime Minister Netanyahu, who himself was seen as like a Churchillian character, who is a war prime minister, has in many ways restored his constituency in Israel. As you can see, that those who have left his war cabinet are ready to come back there. So, if I may say so, Israel has regained much of its allure as a military state or Sparta, but it has lost something as a beacon of a democracy in that region. So its Athenian values are being undermined, but its Spartan tradition of a strong state has been strengthened. But
that's
all this still means...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
All this still means we are no closer to a solution than we were on October 7th last. But domestically, Prime Minister Netanyahu certainly has restored a modicum of credibility that he had lost in the meanwhile. Perhaps he's stronger today than he was even on October 1st last year or October 5th last year. So that's, in a nutshell, what I can say.
No, excellent analysis and sum up of what has happened in the past year. But comes to my next question, which is that an emboldened Netanyahu has even talked of bringing a new Middle East, a regime change in Iran, and might think that, look, I have succeeded in many senses with Hamas in decapitating their leadership. I have put Hezbollah on the back foot. But for him, the head of the snake is Iran, and let's go for the head. That temptation is there, that for once and for all, let's cut that existentialist threat that we continue to have. Do you think this would embolden him? And what are the chances of that happening? What is restraining him? What's pummeling him on forward on this?
So it's a fair way to think that hubris takes over, even in the most strongest of leaders. It's normal for hubris to have an impact. And what you are saying is possibly Prime Minister Netanyahu now thinks that this is his one opportunity to rework the framework of the Middle East. But there are structural challenges to that. Iran is a country of 100 million. Let's not forget, states of that sort have a resilience. As does Israel as a state have resilience, as do many other countries which have established apparatus over the years have resilience. Now, have we ever heard of a solution where escalatory attack on whatever installation has brought about regime change? It's unlikely. And there is no way that Iran and Israel are going to fight tank battles, etc., where you gain land, etc. So what's the hope? The hope is that there will be a internal insurrection if the people in Iran feel that they have been dragged into a war which they were not planning for, they are not ready for. It's again a fair way to think, but let's not forget that there can be a counter thesis to that. That is, people generally rally around a flag when they are faced with an external challenge, especially an external challenge by a country which has not been on friendly terms with them for decades now. So the general thinking will be that they will coalesce among themselves. Israel will coalesce as it has coalesced now under Prime Minister Netanyahu's leadership. There is hardly any dissent against whatever he is thinking right now. So I wouldn't think that it will lead to fundamental change. What it will lead to is perhaps that of the two strains in the Middle East, the second strain of Israel and Iran rivalry now becomes the dominant strain, and the strain, unfortunately, of Palestine and Israel and the Arabs starts receding, which it has been for several years, but it becomes faster there. That's perhaps the bigger shift. I do not see a shift in regime or a new framework. We've seen this before in the Middle East, in Iraq. We've seen this in Afghanistan. What happened after 20 years of investment in terms of resources, in terms of treasure, in terms of human lives? We have the Taliban still there. That was their original US argument, that they will want to depose the Taliban. If a great power couldn't do it for a smaller country, do you think that a smaller power can do it for Iran? So I wouldn't think that is. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu also knows this. There is a hype and public diplomacy which needs to be separated from the realities of military power and the possibilities of what can be done and not done.
Well, let us look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's options, because Iran has struck. Some of their missiles seem to have also hit home and caused damage. And obviously, he needs to bolster his own forces as well as his people to say, look, I've done this with Hamas, I've done it with Hezbollah, I need to deal with Iran. Now, and so let's look at possible riposts on this. One, of course, is he attacks the air bases as Iran did. And there is talk of also the fact that Iran did bomb some of the tanks that were in northern Israel or facing South Lebanon in a way to dissuade them from going after the Hezbollah. That's the sort of Iran version of what happened, really. So there is one option of hitting at military bases as well as air bases that they have. The second, of course, is to go for their oil fields, hit their oil fields and cripple Iran's economic capabilities. And of course, the third is the most serious of them all. All of these are serious, but the most serious is to hit their nuclear establishments wherever they are. So if you go to these, if we could analyze these three possibilities, let's start with the nuclear, because you're the nuclear expert and you would know about where these, you were with the IAEA and how well protected are these and what are the chances of Israel really making a decisive strike on nuclear without, pushing Iran further into another, they paused on their nuclear program. That's what the hope is, whether they push them fully into developing weapons after that.
So, yes, like you've analyzed, the worst case for the region and for the world would be a strike against nuclear facilities. And I understand that the greatest benefit for Israel is to counter what it sees as an existential threat of a nuclear Iran. But let me tell you that Iranian nuclear sites, are amongst the most well-guarded in terms of air defense, number one. Number two, several of their nuclear installations are either underground or in mountain, deep inside mountains, whether it is Natanz, which is underground, whether it is Fordo, which is embedded into a mountainside. These will take a lot to at least even being attacked, because A, the location, B, the terrain, and three, the defense system. Now, even if all this is possible, I don't know whether it is logistically a feasible option to go all the way 1,000+ miles with huge bunker busting weaponry and deliver it on the nuclear sites. Whether it's legally, logistically, I doubt it. Whether a mid-range country can do it. You can, of course, have weaponry of missiles and you deliver it and come back. It's different from these sort of huge bunker busting bombs. If you look at what Israel did in Beirut, the amount of weaponry it used there for a shorter trip was quite amazing, large amounts of weaponry there. So I don't think it's militarily feasible. But even if it is, let's take it. Iran, nuclear knowledge is not only about the equipment. You can destroy that equipment, but knowledge is not going to be wished away. So the general thinking is that even if you hit something, even if you destroy it, it will then make certain for a nuclear Iran, because then all gloves are out. Iran will say you have violated X, Y, Z in terms of our national security defense, and A, B, C in terms of nuclear arrangements globally. We are no longer restrained by it. So, whatever chance you have, and that chance still remains of a non nuclear Iran, because so far they have been saying this is against the tenets of Islam, etc. But when national security is threatened, they are easily going to shift away from that and say, now we require. And it's going to be very difficult. So you have already seen President Biden saying that US will not support a nuclear strike. You have seen G7 also saying this. So you can already see some of this is not on the table, because Israel can only do it with weaponry supplied by others. It cannot do it on its own. So it has a serious challenge, both logistically and to look at the day after, it may create a worse situation. So that's number one. Number two,
Right.
sure, the oil terminals and the oil facilities are an easier target. Also, we need to acknowledge that Iran is dependent on natural gas refining, etc., processing, etc., because it doesn't have adequate. It also takes from other countries. So if you hit that, winter is going to be really harsh for the people of Iran. But sure, it will mean that you clearly hit Iran economically. But what does it mean for who is hit economically? We have seen these sort of scatter approaches only hurt the weakest. And if your goal is to ensure that there is to be a revolt, is not going to be that, because you will the regime will then say its responsibility lies with somebody else. Finally, we can't totally ignore that Iran could reciprocate by hitting oil facilities, gas facilities elsewhere. We wouldn't want the Middle East countries or the Arabs in the Gulf, because we have seen previously Houthis, when they were in conflict with Saudi Arabia, hit oil facilities in Saudi Arabia also. And those are easy prey. And so, from what I would gauge, that it wouldn't be those in a large scale. I mean, one or two is not, I can't answer this, but so that leaves, of course, the third option that you said, military installations, some military headquarters, etc. That's par for the course. It does not alienate the civilian leadership. It's a thing that Iran will perhaps absorb. It sends the signal. It provides an off ramp that don't escalate it further. So maybe somewhere in that range is the managed escalation, which can lead to de-escalation, because Israel's usual policy has been disproportionate response, saying that that's a deterrence. It doesn't use the word disproportionate now, because when you say disproportionate, you then get into international humanitarian law and its objections to disproportionate responses. So it stopped using that, but that's the reality.
Now, if you move to the next step of this, which is, okay, Israel does strike militarily, it's not stupid enough, or let's say, I wouldn't use the word stupid, but unwise to strike oil, because as you said, it could spread very quickly if Iran begins a counter-strike to those that support Israel on this or are quiescent about it. And of course, on the nuclear, even more serious, because it'll bring international opprobrium into the picture. So if you take this particular thing, do you see somewhere on this an end to the conflict, or at least a hiatus or a break or a ceasefire? Because is this the time for Netanyahu to claim victory of some sorts? He has hammered the Hamas, he has hammered the Hezbollah, he has taken on Iran and warned them that they shouldn't get further, and has degraded their capabilities on various fronts. Is this the time for him to declare victory and seek, larger international support for this?
So I would think that following the response would be the time, because right today, diplomacy has no role. All it has a role is in trying to reduce the escalation, not totally stem that escalation. Following whatever is a response is perhaps the best time for what you have said. And the day after is always the more difficult day than when these things are taken. And the day after is what you will find possibilities of a off ramp or de-escalation or a look at other options to now both sides to rest their case. But having said that, that's only a temporary relief because this division between Israel and Iran is not going to be easily healed. It's the new sharp divide cleavage in the Middle East, and we will all have to live with that for some time until things can be worked out.
Now, Iran for a while had, exercised what they call strategic restraint, right? They didn't go after Israel. They were very careful on the first strike. Even the second strike was very measured in terms of their targets. They didn't possibly hit civilians at all in this, struck military targets. Whereas Israel, we have seen, has been, as you had said, it goes for disproportionate action on a lot of these things. Now, somewhere along the way, does Israel sense a security and technological superiority where Iran at one time was a very strong nation, but over a period of time has technologically been degraded? Do you see that asymmetry now playing a part in Israel's thinking and saying, okay, let's hit them now, they're the weakest when it comes to a lot of these things, let's take them out, all their key assets that they have, including nuclear or whatever they think is possible to completely bring Iran to its knees?
So you're right that Israel enjoys military superiority in the region, way above what Iran can offer. But that military superiority does not automatically translate into such dominance that asymmetrical warfare doesn't come into play. So look, 31% of the world's oil comes from the Gulf. So you're playing with extremely difficult situation if the other side responds. Given that oil is a major factor. Right now, Iran only provides oil largely to China and to a few others because oil is sanctioned and you cannot trade in dollars for oil. So it's a challenge for Iran. But I don't see the superiority being such a manner that it can subdue Iran. It hasn't been able to subdue the Palestinians in Gaza after 1 year plus of clear military superiority.
Right.
So I think the lesson is not lost there. Military superiority is not the only basis for a satisfactory outcome. And Israel, I think, will need to understands this very clearly that its military superiority does not translate immediately into such a format of victory that it can declare. So it will declare victory right now, perhaps, and wait for another day. As they say in diplomacy, he who ends on a certain day lives to fight another day. So it's not a happy scenario, but perhaps that's the best we can hope in these circumstances.
And also, let's not forget that despite the fact that the 180 missiles or ballistic missiles that Iran had sent and Israel claimed they had neutralized it, the fact was some did get through. There are reports coming in, and Israel has also sent a warning saying that, look, don't think that our capability ends with this. Your dome will not be able to protect you on that side. So that's a fear factor that's there, which Israel will have to look at and do it. But let's move to the other fronts. And, one of the things, the big concerns, it's just not versus Israel and Iran. The world is now involved. There are major powers that are looking at. What do you see as this restraining or the positive factors that US could play, which is the major sort of, the sole superpower at the moment in terms, and of course, very important to Israel. Can they play a restraining force, or is domestic politics beginning to kick in over there? And the the attitude of the Americans is we have to be very careful in our approach towards Israel because the Jewish support in the elections is critical. So they might be more, I wouldn't say complacent, compliant in terms of what Netanyahu says needs to be done next. Do you think that would be a factor?
So, as they say, all politics is domestic. It's all politics is local, perhaps.
Right.
This has been thinking of many American politicians, starting from Speaker Tip O'Neill in the late 60s, etc. So obviously, in an election year, when October surprises is not what the US, either of the candidates wants, it is a factor. Benjamin Netanyahu knows this very well. There is going to be a difficulty for the current administration to move beyond a point in trying to curb Israel. Also, the world is not what it was before. There are many regional powers who are exerting their importance. We have seen in other conflicts. Look at the frozen conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It was frozen for years. Suddenly, Azerbaijan, with the help of Turkey, etc., has been able to change that equation. There are other places in the world where regional powers are now starting to dominate. Israel sees itself as a regional power. There are limitations of a domestic nature in the US that will curb its trying to take too much of a effort in this time leading to the election. So again, that gap has been effectively utilized by Netanyahu, who also realizes that this is about what he has got is much more than what he had felt on October 7th. So perhaps wiser counsel will prevail now, purely in terms of their own domestic political interests rather than for any other reason, that he may feel that the pendulum can swing again. Best to now consolidate and declare victory. And that's the hope that is there for a less than highest level of escalation. The US will not be able to do much given its dilemmas of a democratic president who's not going to be their vice president, who is feeling challenged both there, plus also in states like Michigan, where there are a large number of Arabs. They play a key role there, etc. So it's a difficult situation, and I don't expect the US to be a key factor in the next few days, except in some element of counseling restraint, reducing the worst form of bunker bombs to be sent, etc. But these are tangential to the bigger picture of ability to influence in a manner that we are used to the US doing in the Middle East.
So, I mean, you're saying largely this will be a decision that Netanyahu will have to take in terms of where he sees that the US can play some role, but at the moment constrained in terms of its approach to contain Israel in that sense. One more factor before we come to the India factor, which is, I think, as important for us to look at, is the regional, the Middle East factor. Now, here again, clearly, Iran is trying to emerge as the leader of the Muslim world. After all, Hamas was Sunni in that sense, Hezbollah is Shia. But, in protecting and even Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, spoke in his address today, at the funeral, in some senses condoning the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, that look, the Muslim faith should be united. That seemed to be a larger message in terms of attacking a common enemy that's there. So what is the dynamics you see? You've served in Saudi Arabia. You're an expert in terms of what we call West Asia affairs. Where do you see the fact that Iran has taken the lead in some senses? There is a leadership issue in it. Saudi Arabia, of course, sees Iran as the existentialist threat, not so much Israel. How is that balance working out in the Arab street or the Muslim, Muslim Middle East as we see it?
So you're true that there are two different viewpoints emerging in this. The street or the common people, clearly Iran has been able to evoke an emotional response that it is the only country which has been able to strike at Israel, not fully successfully, but strike at Israeli territory, which has not been done for the last 20 plus or more than that years by any Arab country. The last time this was, you could see, was in 1973 when Israel and Egypt fought a war along the Suez Canal, etc., the Yom Kippur War. So there is clearly a feeling amongst some segments, are fairly large segments of the ordinary population, that Iran has gained some broader support. Having said that, the Arab regimes are clearly worried about Iran, because that divide has been an divide which is there for long between Persians and the Arabs. And this goes back to centuries of that divide. Many Arab regimes see Iran as the biggest threat, because you have a country of 100 million overlooking countries with very small populations, with very small resources in terms of land, population, etc., etc. So clearly, there has been over the last decades, or maybe 2 or 3 decades, a convergence of interest of the Arab countries, regimes, and Israel, because both see Iran as a challenge either to the leadership of the Muslim world or to Israel as a regional power, etc. and all. So there has been a convergence, but there is a divergence at the people-to-people level. So it's a mixed picture there. Difficulties for the Gulf monarchies who head it, because they are just by and large conservative. They don't like very much change of a fundamental nature, but slow evolving change. And the people clearly, or what you call the Arab street, is clearly up in arms. They see Iran as having done something which others have not been able to do. So that's the situation.
Let me come to the final question on this, and that pertains to India. What are the, if there is a wider conflict, how damaging would it be for India? Which are the areas you see that we would face some issues that we should be concerned about?
So India's engagement with the region is primarily economical. It's not a major political player in that region, but we have enormous economic stakes. Much of our oil comes from there. If there is an impact on the facilities, it will have impact on us. Even if not on those facilities, the price of oil going impacts on our economy. Number two is we have about 8 to 9 million Indians resident there. It's a big challenge for them. Not that all of them will come back to India or anything, but the remittances that they will send will become a challenge. There will also be a scaling back of that. So that's number two. Number three is the Gulf region remains a major trading partner for India. So let's not forget, more than 100 billion of trade from India to that region goes. Another about 100 billion or so is from that region to us, largely oil, etc. and all. So you can clearly see the economic stakes are very high. The political stakes, we have not been a major vociferous player there. Also because our interests, as we've grown as a aspirational power, our interests have also now become multifaceted. So we have interests with every country. We wouldn't like to alienate any country in this, given that this is part of our extended neighborhood. After all, West Asia, as we say it, is our extended neighborhood as much as is East Asia or Southeast Asia. So in that region, we would have serious economic challenges should this divide lead into much more than what we hope it would.
Well, we could continue with that discussion, but because right now we have to see what action Israel will take. Clearly, India and its role that will play, as you had mentioned, has great economic interest. Politically, we have stood on both sides of the divide, balanced our relations, and in that sense kept the conversation going. And humanitarianly, we have helped these countries. So that's something that will get increasingly complex if the situation gets complex. But Syed Akbaruddin, thank you very, very much for your insights and analysis. As usual, lucid, to the point, and with great candor. Thank you so much, Akbar.
Thank you very much, Raj.
So there you have it. Thank you for being with me on this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing But the Truth.